Hello and welcome back to the Our Favorite Bible Stories podcast. My name is Yudochi and I am your host. Welcome back, y'all. It has been some time. Hopefully, this will go up on Monday. First of all, it's a new month. Thank God we're in the month of March. Also, I feel like the year is going by really, really quickly, and I don't know how I feel about that. Like, it was just January. Like, we just celebrated the new year. What do you mean it's March? Like, what do you mean by that? I don't know how I feel about that. I'm grateful that I've made it this far, but also like it's going by a little quickly. But anyway, once again, grateful. I'm glad that you all are here listening to this podcast, that you all are still here. What a blessing it is, especially like in our modern world where nothing is really guaranteed. I believe it is a huge blessing that we are all still in the land of the living, that God is keeping us and sustaining us and providing for us, and we should not take that for granted. Sorry, this is such a side note. I was on Instagram and there was this post about how we take advantage of God's consistency, like the fact that the sun came up in the morning and that we are breathing, that the earth is still spinning, that it's still going around the sun, that the moon has not come and crushed us. Like while of course there's like scientific reasons why that may not happen, like at the end of the day, all of that is beholden to God. And so in this season, maybe not take advantage of God's consistency and his constantness, but may we continuously have a grateful heart to heart of gratitude for all that he is doing. Yeah. How are y'all doing? Are you excited to enter into a new month? How's the weather? Because where I am, the weather doesn't really know how to feel. It's like sunny one day and then it's like trying to snow the next. I'm like, calm that down. Like I didn't I personally did not give you permission to do that, so therefore you are not allowed to. Usher us into the spring, into the spring season with peace. I think the snow's gone. No longer a thing for us. At least it should not be. So like, how about you? Stick to the sun. Stick to the nice sunny weather. That's my personal opinion. Also, I've just been rambling for like 2 minutes. So let's get into the actual meat of this podcast because, as I said in last podcast, if you have not watched the previous podcasts, go watch it. Lies, go listen to it. Yeah, very insightful, lots of good stuff. But this is episode 4. In episode 3, I was like, this episode will be 45 minutes and I will not let it go a minute longer. And that was not accurate. It ended up being like 50 something. And we're going to try again today. The story that I'm talking about today, it's not super long. So I am aiming for 45 minutes and not a second longer. If you do open this podcast and it's giving 50, then just shh. You didn't hear me say this. But I hopefully speaking to existence that this will be 45 minutes. In order for that to happen, I need to stop rambling. So let's get into I guess, what our traditions, our rituals. I don't like the word ritual. What we do here. So let's do song of the week. It was crazy. As I was actually getting ready to do this, I was like, I don't even think I have a song of the week. I don't think there's been a song that I've just like been playing on repeat. What I have been doing, my Spotify, let me see if I can find it. I think my Spotify, I have a Christian music playlist on Spotify and it is like 900 songs. Like if I were to play it in total, it'd be 76 hours and 19 minutes. So definitely a lot of songs. And I am trying, and I've been trying to play the songs that I normally don't listen to. Like I have my like go-to, but I've been trying to click on the songs that don't get as much playtime. Um, ooh, yes. I recently found this song called Fly Away by Virtue, and it's giving. It is giving. It is, if you are like an R&B fan, if you like is it SVW? Yeah, SVW. If you like editor Udochi here, it is in fact SWV. I do apologize to the group members themselves and all the fans. That like early, well, I guess more like mid late 90s, early 2000s, like type of vibey songs, you would love Fly Away. It is so good. If you also like Out of Eden is another Virtue is the group that made it, and they're like a R&B Christian girl group that was, I believe, in the 90s. Out of Eden is another one. So if you like Out of Eden type of music, there I think they're a little bit more R&B than Out of Eden. Um, but it's so good. It's so good that I'm like, is this a wedding song? Will this be in my wedding? We'll find out. I'll let y'all know when I get married. But it is so, so, so phenomenal. Love that. Okay, that's our song of the week. Um, then Rosebud Thorn. Rose is something good that's happened. Bud is something that you're like looking forward to, and a thorn is something not so great that's happened. So I can start with a thorn. I have been trying to be more healthy. So I've been trying to stay away from like rice and like bread and like carbs in general, although I know that there are like some theories that like maybe that's not the smartest thing to do. Um and it has not been working. Maybe it's not smart because it's not realistic for my lifestyle. I straight up had bread, tortilla chips, and ramen yesterday. And I'm not gonna lie, don't regret a thing. I would do it all over again. It was phenomenal. I loved every single second of it. So I need to find a more realistic path towards health, especially in my eating habits. So I guess that is a thorn, but it can also be a bud. I actually really like looking for new recipes. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday, and I was basically saying how I want to get more into creating complex flavors with my cooking. Like I don't want it to be like one note. I want like this is a savory thing. This we have a little umami, got a little spice, got a little sweetness, maybe sourness to round it out. Like I want to create dishes that are complex in flavor. Um, and so that can be a bud. I am hoping that I will be able to do that. And so she suggested that I should like try one new meal a month, like from a cookbook or something. And I'm like, that's smart, doable, can get all the ingredients, and hopefully that will either last me quite some time or I can use it for other dishes. This is 7 minutes. This is why the podcasts are never 45 minutes. Let me move on. But yes, that's a bud. A rose, something good that happened. Um, I have made a decision to be more intentional with my friendships. I think I'm the low maintenance friend. I don't really text. I don't really reach out. I will say yes to things, but like I'm not the initiator. And like God was like, you need to do more. So I have scheduled bi weekly talks with my friends. So hopefully I will be able to do more stuff like that and be more intentional in my friendships. And maybe this is a sign for some of y'all. Maybe you are also the low maintenance friend that needs to be more intentional. I don't know. Talk to God about it. See what he says. But yeah, that's my rosebud and thorn. Also, I am hoping that this will not be a problem, but there are people doing construction in our basement. So it is very possible that that noise will make its way into this podcast. By the grace of God, it won't. But if it does happen, you've been warned. This was your warning. Okay, let's get into the story. But before we do that, let's pray. So, dear Heavenly Father, once again, we want to thank you for this day. I want to thank you for waking us up this morning, starting us on our way. Thank you for bringing us to this time where we're going to learn more about one of the people you put in the Bible for us to glean and learn from. We are so, so grateful that you have given us your word, which is powerful, which has the ability to stand as a mirror to our actions, to our behavior, to our lifestyle, so that we can become more in line with the people that you have called for us to be, God. So I pray that my words today will not be with the enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that our faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. May you be glorified through this talk. May you speak through me. And may we go away from this podcast learning a little bit more about your character, about your goodness, that will give us the ability to trust in you a little bit more. May you be glorified and adored. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so today we will be talking about Ruth. Now, Ruth is an interesting book. There are only two books in the Bible that are named after and are really focused on women, Ruth and Esther. And Ruth is really, really fascinating because it is one of the few books of the Bible. It may actually, I'm trying to think, it may be the only, well, actually, no. Wasn't Jeremiah? I don't think Elijah was either, but he doesn't have a book named after him. It was one of the few books that is named after somebody who is not an Israelite. Ruth is from Moab. And so I think this story is a really great way to show God's intentions of redeeming everyone in the world, um, and bringing them into his marvelous mystery, which is Jesus Christ dying on the cross, that we can all have eternal salvation. So I think this is a really good example, of how that has always been God's intention, as this story is in the Old Testament before Jesus, even actually came to this world. So Ruth, also another side note, this may come across as like kind of conceited. Oh well. So when I was younger and I would go to church, there would be sometimes, we've all had this moment when like the preacher's not really doing it, like it's not their best sermon. Um, they're a little distracted, question mark. We don't know what's going on. It's not giving prime sermon though. Young Yudochi would read Ruth and or make up a sermon in her head and preach to herself, which I don't know, could be biblical because the Bible does say encourage yourself in the Lord. This is Editor Yudochi. Just to be clear, the Bible says this is 1 Samuel 30, verse 6, the second half, but David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. So, not specifically God telling us, but an example of how we can encourage ourselves in the Lord. And some of the sermons would be about Ruth. I wish I could remember the content, but what I do know is that I was convicted after. So, hey, it worked for me back then. But Ruth is definitely one of my favorites. So let's start. So Ruth is 4 chapters, and it basically starts with this man named Elimelech. So Elimelech was, a man from Bethlehem, which was in Judah, and so actually, let me give some context. So this story is also set around the time of Judges. So if you've ever read the book of Judges, it's basically God would, bring up someone who was like a prophetic leader of the people of Israel, and if there were problems, if there were issues, they would go to this person, and this person would receive inspiration from God and would help them through. One of the interesting things about the time of Judges is that like the people would be good when the judge was alive. Then the second the judge would die, they would go back to all their debauchery. And so it was not a time of consistency. It was not a time where people's faith was actually rooted or their lives were rooted in God, and was mostly a time when everybody was doing what was right in their own eyes. We have a man named Elimelech. He had a wife named Naomi and 2 sons. And so there was a famine in the land. So Elimelech was like, I'm not staying here. So he gets up, he uproots his family, and they go to Moab. And Moab was considered a pagan country at that time, so they did not have the same religious belief structure that Israel did. Well, Israel was supposed to have, and they like worshiped pagan gods. It was like a completely different religious society. And so they were only meant to stay there for like some time, but they ended up staying there for about 10 years. And during that time, the 2 sons named Mahlon and Kilian both married women from Moab, Ruth and Orpah. And so there was like this whole family unit that was happening there. But unfortunately, Naomi's husband Elimelech and her 2 sons all got killed. So, as for people that were part of that original family unit that moved, only Naomi is still there. And she has her 2 daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah. And so I think a lot of times we like gloss over this because like the juicy part is like Ruth and Boaz getting together. But like, man, I would be devastated. I pray that this is not my portion, would never, and it will never be anybody's portion listening to this. But to one, uproot your life, go to another place. So you are a foreigner in this country. You are not, used to the traditions. You're not used to the way of life that happens there. And your only connection, like your real, like your only family, all of them die. So it's literally just you, and you have 2 daughter-in-laws, and it seems like they have a really close relationship, as we'll get to later. But you're really by yourself. And Naomi talks about how like God has dealt, where is it that God has dealt right. This is chapter 1, verse 13. The end, Naomi said, "It is more bitter for me than for you because the Lord's hand has turned against me." And I think often in difficult times like this, there is this call for us to have hope and to have faith. And I absolutely believe that we should. God is good even in the bad times. But like, I think some of us would also be like, what have I done wrong? What did I do? Why is all of this happening to me? So it is a human reaction to be like, I think God's mad at me. It may not be an accurate reaction, or maybe God, maybe you have sinned, but I do think it's definitely a human reaction. I don't want to gloss over the pain that she must have felt during this time when to have all of her immediate family die. And so, um, and they all die in Moab. So not even in the place that they came from, not even their home country, but in a foreign land. And so Naomi had heard that Bethlehem was popping, that they were back to regularly scheduled programming, that there was provision there. And so she said, "Why am I going to stay here in Moab where I have nothing? I know no one. Let me go back to Bethlehem." And so she tells her two daughter-in-law, she's like, "Listen up, y'all. I love y'all. Like I love y'all like my own daughters." Like she even calls them her daughters. But she was like, "I'm going back to my land, to my people. And so you guys need to go back to your people as well." And so she tells them, this is verse 8. Then Naomi said to her two daughter in laws, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." And so she gives them her blessing and she was like, "Be free, go and live your life. I will figure this out by myself, but I want better for y'all." And so at this time, I think there's this really interesting discussion about what were the rights of one woman, but specifically widows during this time. In the New Testament, there's a lot of text about how the church is supposed to take care of widows. And I think there's often this idea that widows were um, very disenfranchised in that society, that they did not have as many rights. Um, and I was trying to find out more about that. And it seems like that's not actually fully correct, that poor widows, people who did not have anything, like um, whose like father or husband or son died and there was no property or no land, because at the end of the day this still was like a paternalistic society. They did not have as many rights and they would really be at the mercy of whoever is around them. Like they had no one to advocate for them. But if your husband died and you're now a widow, you technically still have the right of the land. um that would be passed on to children. And there have been like times when there were disputes between women about land, so it was really clear that they were able to own and operate land. While that may be different for Moab, it was clear that widows had the right to the land um during this time, as we'll see later. And so it is really possible that like they have a lot more agency if they were to go back to their father's house and to try to marry someone else, because they could have rights in their other household. But if they were to stay with Naomi, it would be a little bit more difficult for them to recoup. And so initially she was like, "Okay, y'all go." And initially both of them were like, we're not going anywhere, Naomi. You are our mother. We love you. We are going to stay with you. We're going to stick with you. And so then they start going on the journey back to Bethlehem. And then Naomi's like, "No, like actually y'all have to go." She's like, "I can't even." So there was this tradition at the time, and one of my friends, I asked her, I was like, "Girl, you got to be on this podcast." And she was like, "Yeah, I'm going to talk about Judah and Tamar." Wild story. But one of the biggest things in that story was that if um, a woman marries a man and the man dies, it is up to his brothers to marry the woman and produce a child that would then be the namesake or the keeper of the original man's lineage. So if woman A marries man A and man A dies, then man A's brother, man B, is supposed to marry woman A. So that way, if they have a child, it would basically be, it would continue the lineage of man A. And so Naomi hints at this idea when she says in verse 12, "Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up?" So she was referencing that Jewish tradition of having the son or having the brother of of the husband marry and bear fruit and bear children. And so in this second plea, when she was like, no, actually, y'all, I can't, like, you're not, it would be better for you to stay in Moab, go back to the way your own lifestyle. Um, After this, Orpah's like, I'm sorry, but yeah, you're right. And so Orpah dips. And I think there's often this idea that Orpah was not right to do that, or that she wasn't being faithful, or she wasn't as good as Ruth. And like, I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think it's like a very normal reaction. Like, technically she's going to a land that she does not know. She doesn't know what's going to happen there. She doesn't know if she's even gonna be able to find another husband. Like, they're both quite young at this time, so they could potentially have like a very fruitful life. So I don't blame Orpah for being like, yeah, I'm really sorry. I still do love you, because they in verse 14 says, as at this they wept aloud again. So they were obviously very grieved to leave each other. But Orpah was like, you know what, you're right. It would be better for me to leave. And so Orpah's like, yep, I'm going. And so then Naomi's like to Ruth, do you see what Orpah just did? Miss Ma'am, use your sense and leave too. And then Ruth is like, absolutely not. And then we get one of the most iconic phrases in the book of Ruth. It is Ruth chapter 1, starting at verse 16. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it so ever so severely, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. And then says 18, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Now, this is crazy, because it one shows her allegiance to Naomi, which is people will have different thoughts about whether or not she should have done that, but I think it shows her character, it shows her dedication, shows the love that she had for Naomi, and also shows Naomi's character. The simple fact that both of her daughter-in-laws, when presented with the opportunity to leave, were like, no, we're going to stay with you. And some could say that, like, oh, maybe that was like a tradition, maybe that was what they were supposed to do, but if you didn't like your mother-in-law and she said you can leave, deuces. But the simple fact that, like, they both initially were like, no, I want to stay with you. And that Ruth was like, no, you're not getting rid of me. Like, that's a huge testament to who Naomi is. But it's also fascinating, because at this time, Ruth had never experienced, well, according to what we've seen and probably what it would have been, Ruth had never experientially um interacted with God or experienced God. And so she wasn't an Israelite. She didn't have all of the stories um about how God had delivered them from the land of Egypt, and how he had sustained them, and the battles that he had fought for them. And even if she had heard those stories, there was no evidence that she would then be included in any of the promises that were for the Israelite people. And so, like, you could say that she married into like an Israelite household, so therefore she could become, therefore through that association, she's now like Israelite by proxy. I don't know, but like, I do think that, like, from a lifestyle standpoint, it is really unlikely that you would have actually encountered or been a part of Jewish traditions. And so I think, once again, it's a testament to Naomi's character. She was like, I trust you so much and I love you so much that I will adopt your way of life. Crazy. But yeah, so Ruth is like, nope, I'm staying with you. You're not gonna get rid of me. And so they travel to Bethlehem. And so they arrive in Bethlehem, and the whole town was like, I don't know if excited is the right word, but the whole town was stirred, because they were like, is this Naomi? And Naomi says, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. And this is so sad, because Naomi means pleasant. And so she was like, the pleasant life that I was supposed to have, the pleasantness that I was supposed to encounter, I none of that has come to me. She said it would be better for me to be called Mara. That is so sad, yet so relatable. Like, I think one of the beautiful things about Christianity is that it does give us a hope for eternal life and for the future, but it doesn't mean that we're immune to emotions. And I do think that there is the chance to become very bitter given the circumstances that she's had. Um, and so, not to say that it justifies it, but like, I do think it's a really normal human reaction. And even 21, she says, "I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Wow. Oof. That's so real though. I think that's another thing that I'm struck with in the Old Testament is like the people are saying it like it is. Like there is no sugarcoating, there is no glossing over, there's no like painting of like, oh, this is what I should be thinking, this is how I should be acting. Like Naomi was like, this is what it is. I went away full, he brought me back empty. I am upset and sad now. Like she is literally being so honest with, I guess technically her family members, relatives, and like her neighbors. Like she's being genuine. And like even such a side note, but like even in Psalm, when David is upset and distressed, he is telling God that he is upset and distressed. He's not trying to sugarcoat it. He is not trying to say like, yeah, I'm sad, but you know what, you got me. He's like, yes, he does believe that, but he's also like, God, my foes are rejoicing. My foes are happy right now. He says, what is going on? He was like, I've done what I'm supposed to do. So what is occurring? Like he is being very genuine, honest with God, and in almost all of the chapters, usually in Psalm, where he has that type of lament. There is a hopeful phrase or like a gathering of the self at the end or at the beginning, which was like, but no, I'm gonna wait on you. I believe you're faithful. I believe um that you are trustworthy. But it doesn't stop him from saying how he feels. So may that be another lesson. Maybe be honest with God about how we feel. But yeah, so Ruth and Naomi are now in Bethlehem. They've left Moab. And at that time, there was this system for the poor in the land. So, Israel at this time was an agricultural society. They made their profit and they made their livelihood off of the land, off of crops. And so there's a system where the poor would be able to go into the surrounding land or to the land owned by other people, and they would be basically able to gather like the leftover crops. For example, if the workers of the land were harvesting and they drop something, they're supposed to leave it there so that way the poor can collect it and would have grain and food to sustain themselves. So in chapter 2 says, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. And so Ruth goes into a field, which just happened to be Boaz's field, but we know God was in control. He led her to Boaz's field. Um, and Boaz comes and he's like, who's that? She's new. Who's that? And then the overseer was like, this is Ruth. She's a Moabite. She came with Naomi, and she's been working really hard to provide for the family. She's been here since sunrise to sunset, and she's just been collecting. Now, this is another word. You never know who's watching. You never know who is taking note of your work ethic, how you're operating, how you're treating people. There's this verse that says, do everything as if unto the Lord. And I think this is a really, oh my gosh, what? This is a really good example where Ruth wasn't trying to get noticed. She wasn't trying to stand out. She was just like, this is what I got to do to survive. And she was just putting her head down and working. Um, and the simple fact that she was being studious and diligent in her work brought her to the notice of the overseer and then to Boaz. And so then Boaz, Boaz was like, interesting. So he went to Ruth. This is chapter 2, verse 8. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. Now that's a man. Now that is a man. Like, can you imagine? This is someone, first of all, she's a foreigner in this land. And so they are instructed to um treat foreigners with kindness. But she's still a foreigner in this land. And so she definitely would not be afforded all of the luxuries that Boaz just gave her. He was like, you don't have to go to another field. You don't have to try to make your way. No, this is your place from now on. He's like, you're going to work with the women, so you are under you're under my covering in terms of work. You don't have to work as hard. You can stay with the women. You won't be harassed because it seems like she was young, and they're like, although I don't see anything that says that she was beautiful. I don't say that she wasn't, but like we don't know. I think a lot of places tend to like focus on the idea like she was so pretty. She was so. It's like the Bible doesn't say anything about her looks. It does say something about her work ethic and her character, but does not say anything about her looks. But she was a young woman, so he was like, I'm gonna make sure that the men don't do anything to you. He's like, even when you're thirsty, you can go over there to where the workers get their drink. You go on and get you a drink. Hello, hello, and this is all to someone who is not promised to him, who he technically is not going to gain anything from. That type of covering. Now, this is a message for someone because I feel like some of y'all are settling. This man literally did not ask Ruth for anything in return. Was just like, I see you. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Here is how I'm going to cover you. And so then Ruth was like, why have you done all of this? Who am I to find favor? And he was like, it's because, once again, I see what you've done for your mother-in-law. I see how you have left your own land. You've come here and you've been providing for her and you've been working hard so that way you both can live. And so, ooh, even in verse 12, it says, may the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So once again, calling back to that earlier phrase, which was like, your God will be my God. And it seems that there's a response to that declaration where it is an outward acknowledgement that God has taken her under his wings, even though she is not ethnically Jewish. Y'all, a word. This is a word. And so he once again shows her some favor. She gets to have a lunch with all of the other people. And I think it's another thing that was really fascinating. It says here that she ate all she wanted and had some left over. So there was an abundance in the house of Boaz, and not only was there an abundance, she was allowed to partake in that abundance. And she even took some of that leftover food home. When I say the covering, when I say the provision, the protection that Ruth had, that Ruth was given in this place, it was divine favor. And Boaz was also doing a little favoritism, letting her sit with them, letting her partake in this meal. Yeah, it was setting the scene. It was definitely setting the scene. And so then Boaz even told the people, he was like, you know what, leave some sheaves on the floor for her. So sheaves were the way they collected the grain, they would collect them into like a big bundle called a sheaf. And so Boaz was like discreetly like, yeah, leave a little thing for her, like, drop a few sheaves on the floor. Yeah, give her something to take home. Oh man. Anyway, and so Ruth gleaned. Even though she was being shown favor, she still had a really hard work ethic. She still stayed there until evening. She gleaned in the field, so she went and collected the grain in the field and went home to Naomi. And Naomi was like, "Hello?" She said, "How did you get so much?" And then Ruth also, once again, her character, she also brought home the leftover food and gave it to Naomi. And Naomi was like, "Well, where'd you go? How are you able to bring back?" And I think it's a testament that this was divine favor, because she was like, this is not a normal amount that gleaners actually get. Like, where did you go? What happened? And then Ruth told her, she was like, this man named Boaz. And she was like, Boaz? Yeah. Yeah, that's our guardian redeemer. So a guardian redeemer at this time, it's really similar to what I said before, where there would be someone that is of the lineage of normally of the man, well, I think actually only of the man, that was supposed to protect the rights of the woman, or protect the rights of the family, keep the family name going, either by buying up land, by, if there was a slave, by buying the freedom of a slave of somebody who was of their lineage, or to marry any widow, so that way they could produce a child in honor of the deceased. And so, once again, really similar to what Naomi was saying before. And so, Boaz was one of the guardian redeemers. So, he was supposed to be that person that would basically provide for the family and keep the lineage going. And so, after the end of the harvest, Naomi goes to Ruth and she's like, come here. She's like, I think it's time for you to have a house where you will be provided for. And I think that was a really good point where even though technically, once again, widows did have rights, and because she was the daughter-in-law of Naomi, she would technically also have rights to the land because that would have been the inheritance of the two sons. So one of the sons that she married, it would have been their inheritance. But still, she was a foreigner, she was a woman. There were just difficulties that could happen as a result of that. And so Naomi was like, I think you should I think it's time for you to get married, to have rest in your husband's home. And I think there's another fascinating thing. We're in chapter 3. Um, and the word for home is also the word for rest. And I think that's such a beautiful idea of the way that marriage and homes and like settling should be, that it's supposed to be a place of rest, that after dealing with the outside world, that coming home would be a place of peace and calmness and contentment. Yeah, that was just like fascinating that they're the same word. And so Naomi was like, well, it seems like Boaz is going to be that man. And I think it's actually really fascinating because once again, I do think that we tend to play up the romance factor. Not to say that Boaz didn't like Ruth, because it was really clear that there was some favoritism going on, that he was definitely favoring her above the rest of the gleaners that could have been in this field. But at the end of the day, because of the guardian redeemer structure, it was their obligation, the guardian redeemers, to help out the family of those that are impoverished in the same lineage or in the same family. So Boaz was supposed to help them by either buying up the land or by marrying Ruth. Like that was what was supposed to happen according to the traditions of that time. But still, Naomi was like, I know how men work. I know what it is. She was like, put on some perfume, put on a cute dress, do your hair a little, put a little makeup on, and like go to the field. And so she was like, wait until he's done eating and drinking. And when he's lying down, take note of where he is lying and go lie down at his feet. And Naomi's a mastermind. She's a smart woman. She said, I know what this is. I know what it be. I know what to do. Listen to my advice, Miss Ma'am. Um, And Ruth was like, bet. So she did exactly what she said. She waits until he's done eating and drinking. And chapter 3, verse 7 says, and was in good spirits. That's a word for someone. Make sure you ask for things the right time in the right moment. And so then he goes and lies down near his crops to make sure that thieves don't steal them. He said, I worked too hard. I own too much land for y'all to come and steal my crops. And so he goes and he's lying down in the field. Then Ruth approaches quietly, uncovers his feet, and lays down. And this was another tradition at that time where putting a blanket over a woman at that time was basically like a proposal in a way. Let's talk about going for what you want. So Ruth went up there and she was like, hello, marry me. Said, it's you. Technically, once again, it was her right to have one of the guardian redeemers be her husband so she could have a child. But then she goes and she's like, you are my guardian redeemer. Spread the corner of your garment. Once again, that would be him agreeing to the marriage. So then Boaz was like, Miss Ma'am, we're in chapter 3. Verse 11 says, and now my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. But then we're like, cliffhanger. Turns out there is another guardian redeemer who is closer to them. So it seems like there are several guardian redeemers in a family, and there's one who is closer. So Boaz was like, listen, Miss Ma'am, I'll marry you right now, but I can't, because once again, following the order, following the system, the person that is closer has to be given the opportunity, quote unquote, do the right thing and redeem the family. And so he was like, but don't worry, I am going to go and find out whether he wants to do this or not. And if he doesn't, you're my wife. And so he's like, stay here till morning and then I'll go and figure it out. And so then Ruth lays at his feet until morning, and then she goes back to the I even peeped that. Hold on, I'm sorry, we gotta go back. We're still in chapter 3, verse 15. As Ruth is getting ready to go, he's like, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing, hold it out." When she did, so he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. Hello? 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 Don't ever settle. Do not ever settle. Once again, he doesn't even know if he will be marrying her. It is very possible that the other guardian redeemer is like, you know what? No, that's all right. I'll take it. This is such an amazing thing about Boaz's character. He's not doing what he's doing to get something from Ruth. He's not doing it because she's young or because she may be beautiful or to like get anything from her. He's literally doing this because it's the right thing to do. Their characters are phenomenal. They're really, I'm not gonna lie, they're eating up other people in the Bible. High key. Some of the other ones, of course, everybody has their faults, but some people had wives and mistreated them. This man is not even married to her and is treating her like a queen and may never get married to her and is still treating her kindly. Now, let's take a pause right now and look ourselves in the mirror. Do you only treat people kindly if you're gonna get something from them? Are you only kind to those that can give you something? Or are you kind to everyone? If you know that you're interacting with someone who you may never get a single thing from, whether it be friendship, whether it be companionship, whether it be a romantic relationship, whether it be money, advice, a job, whatever it is, if you are interacting with someone and you know you may never get something from them, would you still treat them the same way? Would you still be kind and courteous to them? Would you still have and show a godly character? I'll wait. I'll wait. And let's just be clear. This is something for all of us, me included. So Ruth goes home and then Naomi's like, so what happened? And so Ruth tells her the details. And one commentary was like, I assume that Ruth was, or the commentary was basically like, Ruth would probably be really nervous at this point because once again, it is her right to have someone marry her. But it seemed like she thought it was gonna be Boaz, and now it could just be this random person who she does not know. And I was like, yeah, I would also be concerned. You don't know his character, you don't know who he is, you don't know how he treats people, like you don't know any of this. And also, I don't know, it's a little sus because this system, I do think it's interesting that Boaz hadn't brought up the idea of marriage before, but maybe it's because he knew he wasn't the closest guardian redeemer. But I do think it's weird that the closest one, it doesn't seem like he had visited Naomi. It doesn't seem like he had maybe he didn't know they were in town, but like it doesn't seem like he's done anything to take his status and to take his place to help the family. Some people have titles, but do not use the power that they hold for good. Because he should have been knocked up in this door and said, well, how can I help y'all? Y'all are back. I realize that everybody is gone. How how can I help you? What can I do? And you can say that maybe he didn't know. But as we can see in chapter 4, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. So obviously he was in the town. Did you come back from a trip? Did you go on vacation? But there was a whole harvest season, so if he had land, he would have had to be there. Why didn't you come and do something? Interesting. That's all I'm going to say. But sorry, going back to the end of chapter 3 really quickly. Verse 18. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. What a man. Urgency. He said, there is some confusion. We're not sure what's going to happen. So I'm going to figure it out. So Boaz goes. And Boaz is, let me tell you something. Naomi, Boaz, they're a sneaky duo. They are a sneaky duo because I never peeped this. They had never mentioned selling the land. They had never mentioned that should be part of the deal. But Boaz comes to the guardian redeemer and then he calls the elders so they have witnesses. Boaz be a lawyer. Boaz is who you need to represent you. Because he went about it in such a way to really, really, trap the man is not the right way, but to really get what he wanted. And I'm not gonna lie, I do support it. So Boaz gathers the elders, he calls the man and he says, sit here. So he says that Naomi has come back from Moab. She's selling the piece of land that belonged to Elimelech, which is their relative. Then he was like, Boaz is crazy. He's like, I just thought I should bring this to your attention that there is some land that is being sold. And since you are the closest guardian redeemer, you have rights to it first. Me being the good elder that I am, being the good leader in the community, I just wanted to bring it to your attention that you have first dibs on this land. Once again, they had not spoken about the land before, but he knew the angle. But Boaz knew the angle to go for. Oh, he's intelligent. And so he's like, I just thought I should bring it to your attention in the presence of the elders, witnesses. Oh, Boaz has such big brain energy. He really does. That's so smart. And so he was like, let me know if you want to redeem it. If you don't, I will, as I am the next closest guardian redeemer. And so the man was like, you said land? Yeah, I'll buy it. Yeah, that sounds like a real good deal. And then Boaz just snuck this in. He said, up. On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. Oh, what a man. What a man, what a man, what a man, what a mighty good man. I don't know, is that an appropriate song to sing right now? Probably not. Let me actually see. Okay, yeah. I was using the NIV version. What is this? I like the King James version better because I think it gives a fuller understanding of what actually happened. Then said Boaz, what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. And so, once again, we talked about the rights that widows have. It seems that because Ruth was the widow of one of them, one of the sons, that she also had rights to the land. And so it seems that in him buying Naomi's land, he's also buying Ruth's land. And with the land comes Ruth, because once again, the guardian redeemer is supposed to marry the widow and produce children. And so Boaz knew, he roped him in that set down the law. Because he was like, oh, but if you're going to buy the land, then you have to marry Ruth. And the man said, absolutely not happening, not a choice, not a chance. Because he was like, it could endanger my own estate. And there's a really interesting commentary about like why he made that decision. It's not something that I truly care about because this story is not about him. But if you want, you can go read about it. But I just know, once again, this is just my imagination. I know Boaz was smiling like a cat. He was like, oh, really? You don't want to marry Ruth? And so the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. Boaz, a man, because he was like, I'm not leaving anything to chance. He said, and then this is verse 9 of chapter 4. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's wife, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. So was it going to become next year or next week or next 5 years that this man will come and be like, well, this is my land, you bought it illegally? Said, I gave you the chance, you didn't want to do it, here are the witnesses. Like, tell me this is not prime time court drama. Tell me this isn't. He is up there with any of the lawyers of Law and Order, of Criminal Minds, of NCIS. I'm not even sure if the last two have lawyers in their show, but he is up there. This is genius. He started with an avenue he knew the guy would want. Then he snuck it in, but if you're going to do that, you're going to do this. He called witnesses, then said, well, if you're not going to buy it, I will. And then chapter 4, verse 7 said, now in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing the transactions in Israel. And that's what the guardian redeemer did. He removed his sandal, verifying that this whole thing was legal. Honestly, I couldn't have done a better job myself, and I don't even hold a law degree. Like, man, this should be required reading in law school. Because this, mastery of the craft. Anyway, the elders are like, yep, we saw it. We are witnesses. And oh, this is such a beautiful blessing. They said, may the Lord, this is verse 11, may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrath and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. That's exactly what happens. So Boaz takes Ruth and she becomes his wife, and she has a child. And this is such a beautiful thing because children were considered a huge, and they still are, but they're at the time they were considered a huge blessing in that society. Children were the people you could continue your lineage through. They would get your inheritance, and they're also just they're adorable, And so this is a way. This really shows how God redeemed the years. There is a verse. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know where it is. Oops. Watch first episode, you know that that's the thing. But it basically says, may the Lord restore unto you all the years the cankerworms and caterpillars and locusts and palmerworms have eaten up in your life. This is restoration. All of them were childless. Well, Naomi had 2 children. Both of her children were killed. And with them being killed, like the thing is that Ruth finding her place and her rest, like that wouldn't really extend to Naomi. But because of the love that was between Ruth and Naomi, because of their interactions, when Ruth did have a child, all of the women said, praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Do you know what a huge compliment it is to have people say that your daughter-in-law is better than 7 sons? In that paternalistic society where they would be crying and upset if they didn't have a son? Not, and this is a beautiful example of the way that God moves and the way that he operates and the way that he redeems. Because the restoration didn't even come through her own loins. It did not, Ruth was not her biological child. But God brought them together. And through Ruth, Naomi was able to experience the joy of life again. Through Ruth, Boaz took a vested interest in them. Well, it seems like he would have already been kind, but like he took a vested interest in their lives, bought up their land, provided for them, and allowed Naomi to be a grandmother. And she was able to nurse their child and care for their child. And she wasn't just like some distant person. She was actively involved in the life of the child. Hello? Hello? Something beyond what she could have ever imagined. Like, if you were to tell Naomi that when she was leaving Moab with a dead husband and 2 dead children, that she would ever experience this type of joy, she would have laughed at you. She said, change my name to Mara, for my life is bitter. Despite all of which, she even proclaimed things over her own life. God had another plan. And God used somebody who was not Israelite by birth. He used her to redeem them. There is nothing that could disqualify you from being used by God. And this is also a testament that salvation and grace and faith and closeness and interactions with God were not only for that people. It is so clear that God's plan A was to allow everyone to have the ability to be reconciled to him. One of the kickers. This is verse 17. They named the child Obed. He was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. You know King David? You know David and Goliath David? David and Saul David, David and Bathsheba David, but David. And then we know that David was one of the ancestors of Jesus. Ruth, a woman from Moab, who technically should not have even been included in the inheritance, she is one of the ancestors of Jesus Christ. Hello? Hello? And let's make it even sweeter. Let's make it even sweeter. Let's go to Matthew chapter 1. Oh my gosh, what? Rahab was the mother of Boaz. Oh no, Rahab was the grandmother of Boaz. That's crazy. I did not realize that. Which is probably why he treated. Oh, I should have brought this up earlier. Which is probably why he was able to treat Ruth with such kindness. Because his grandmother was not ethnically Jewish. Ooh, there's a word in that, the way that God set it up, so that way before Ruth even came into the picture. Once again, this is just conjecture, we don't see this in the Bible, but that could potentially be setting up Boaz to treat foreigners with more kindness because he knows that his grandmother was one, setting him up to then marry a foreigner. Anyway, in Matthew 1, it lists out the genealogy of Jesus, and there are only 4 women, right? Well, maybe 5. Maybe 5. There's only 5 women that are listed in this. Tamar. Well, and actually 4 are only listed by name. I don't know why they didn't put Bathsheba's name. But Tamar is listed. Rahab is listed. And guess who else is? Ruth. Ruth, the Moabite, the foreigner, was also listed in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. I'm about to praise dance. Oh, this is a good story. And then we can even see this is currently 1 hour and 8 minutes. We could even see how there are like similarities between Boaz and Jesus. Boaz treating Ruth with kindness, even though she's technically not part of their society. How Jesus sat with the people that were scorned by the religious leaders of that time. How he broke bread and interacted with and healed those who were seen as untouchable in society. But how both Boaz and Jesus made sacrifices that they knew may never be returned. Boaz was still providing for Ruth, even when he knew that someone else may marry her. Still was making provision. And Jesus Christ died on the cross, knowing that most people in the world would never, ever be grateful for his sacrifice and would never take him seriously and would instead mock him and make fun of him. Would never take him as their Lord and Savior. Still died on the cross for them, so they could even have the chance to be brought into the kingdom. I'm not gonna lie, before I do this, I was like kind of concerned. I'm like, man, what do I have to say about Ruth and Boaz? A lot. The Lord had a lot to say, and I'm grateful that I could be used as a vessel. Literally, going through this now reminded me why this is one of my favorite stories. I know most people are like, it's for the romance, and I'm not gonna lie, the romance is giving in it. Although I don't know if I would really. No, there's definitely some favoritism going on. He definitely appreciated her. But I think it's just a testament to the characters of everybody involved, from Naomi to Ruth to Boaz, the way that God can qualify and bring anybody into his divine plan, the way that he there's a verse, I wish I knew where it was, but there's no partiality with God. And this is a clear example. How he restores and redeems the years, how he saw the pain. And this is an exceeding abundant moment. Even after all of her immediate family died, God provided her with a daughter whose love was so apparent that the woman of the town said that her love was better than having 7 sons. I want to have a character where they're like, it is better for you to be someone's daughter-in-law for them to have 7 of their own children. What? I love this story. It's so good. Okay, I'm hoping this is currently an hour and 12 minutes. I'm hoping I can edit this down. It's not going to be 45 minutes. I need to stop playing myself. I think I just need to acknowledge that this is going to be an hour long podcast or 50 minutes and just have peace with that. But yeah, this was the story. This was our conversation. Thank you for listening to this podcast about Ruth. Once again, make sure you go read Ruth for yourself so you can glean some more information, glean some more insights, be encouraged. Yeah. And may God be with you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you. May he be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you his shalom, his peace. Nothing missing, nothing broken. Amen. Amen. Okay, well, I hope y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye.